When I talk about labor market, the first thing that arises is you have to understand that not everyone in the population is a working population. You have the entire population, and you can divide the population in two parts: people who are working and people who are not working. People who are not working is called the dependent class. Don't worry, we will write everything down. Pehle samajh lo. People who are not working is the dependent class. Just for example, people from age 0 to 18 can be dependent on their parents. So that's the dependent class. People from 60 till the end, they have retired and maybe they are dependent on their children. That's also the dependent class. So I must divide my entire population into people who can work and people who cannot work. Okay, so what will I say? But I will say that if I have the total population, you can give the title as flow of workers. So if I have my total population, this population can be divided in two parts. One is dependent and one is non-dependent. In dependent, I will include all people till the age of 18 or 16, depending on which country you are from. कुछ countries में 18 तक work करना allowed नहीं है, कुछ में 16 तक. And then anybody above the age of 16. Now, the people who are not dependent, मतलब वो काम कर सकते हैं, they are between the age of 19 to 18 plus to below 60. But these people, they can further be divided in two parts: institutional and the other can be non-institutional. Civilians. बेटा इंस्टीट्यूशनल वो हो गए जो मिलिट्री में है, उनको हम वर्किंग में नहीं काउंट करेंगे, वो हमारी जनरल वर्किंग में नहीं आएंगे, राइट? सो अदर देन दीज, जो भी नॉन इंस्टीट्यूशनल है, जो किसी ऐसे इंस्टीट्यूट से कनेक्टेड नहीं है कंट्री के, दैट इज द जनरल सिविलियन पॉपुलेशन दैट आई हैव. नाउ आउट ऑफ दीज सिविलियंस आई कैन डिवाइड इट इन टू पार्ट्स. There may be people who want to work and there may be people who don't want to work. Just for example, there may be people who are housewives. Housewives, they are non-institutional civilians. वो किसी institute से connected नहीं है, but they are just going ahead and they're working within their home, right? Similarly, there may be people who say, supposedly, I want to take a break for 1 year from my regular work. Then I am also a non-institutional civilian, but I'm not working. So I can divide this again in two parts. One becomes your civilian labor force and other becomes out of labor force. तो बेटा ये लेबर फोर्स कौन सी हो गई? ये लेबर फोर्स वो लोग हैं जो काम करना चाहते हैं. People who are willing to work. They may get job or they may not get job, but they should be willing to work. Then they are part of the labor force. So we can say now we should define the labor force first. So please define it, beta. Labor force. The civilians who are willing to work. Form labor force. So they may or may not get a job. वो बात की बात है. but they are looking out for a job, na? They want to work, na? They don't want to stay at home. Then they are part of this labor force. So then labor force can be divided in two parts. One becomes employed and one becomes unemployed. Who are employed? Employed are the people who have job, who are currently working. And who are unemployed? People who are not working, but they want to work. They are looking out for job. So I want to define unemployed as those people who are willing to work. They want to work, but do not currently have a job. So those people who are willing to work, काम तो करना चाहते हैं, but job नहीं है, that is an unemployed person. Now, when you will get this in exam, you have to make this flow. If you don't make this flow, then things will be difficult for the faculty to understand. Okay, so this diagram, which is the flow of workers, this is very, very important. Now, there is another diagram that we need to understand, and I can call that diagram as the relationship between employed, unemployed, and labor force. And I want to do this with some numbers. तो ध्यान से समझो अब हम क्या कर रहे हैं. Say, I make a circle and this represents employment. And I'm saying that there are 127 million people who are employed. वो लोग जो अभी employed हैं currently, वो 127 million लोग हैं एक country के अंदर. And beta, I am saying that unemployed. There are 7.0 million people who are unemployed. And then I have out of labor force. There are 66.7 people who are out of labor force. अब पहली बात समझो. Suppose I ask you, find the labor force. So beta, what is the labor force? Those people who are either employed or unemployed. या तो वो employed है या unemployed है, but they are part of the labor force. They are willing to work. Then that is labor force. So beta, my labor force will be employed. L will be employed plus unemployed. Employed will be 7. Unemployed will be 7. And employed will be 127. So I will get this as 134 million. That is going to be my labor force. Now, suppose I ask you question number 2, find the total population. So beta, यहाँ पे कुछ civilians, non-civilians, dependent, non-dependent, कोई information नहीं दी है. So I can simply say in this case that total population will be people in the labor force plus out of labor force. Either वो काम कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं. Either they are willing to work or not willing to work. And this means that these people who are out of labor force, it already includes younger children and old retired people. Because no third information is given. यहाँ और कुछ भी नहीं दिया हुआ. मतलब out of labor force में वो लोग भी होंगे जिनकी जॉब खत्म हो चुकी है, people who have retired, automatically they are not looking for job, so they are out of labor force. And children, like for example, people who are studying currently, right, they are also not looking for job, they are also out of labor force. So it means that this out of labor force would have included people who are basically dependents. That is why this is the thing, right? So this may also happen. So I can just say that beta labor force was 134. This is what I calculated. And my out of labor force is going to be 66.7. So this is going to be, calculate this, 9 and 10, 200.7. This is going to be my total population. Third thing. So beta, these kind of numericals can come in exam as a 5 marker. So you should be aware of these. Now just think about it. Beta, I am saying that labor force is employed plus unemployed. Suppose I divide throughout by L. I'm dividing throughout by labor force. So क्या हो जाएगा? L by L is equal to E by L plus UE by L. Beta L by L तो simply 1 हो गया. This thing, number of people employed by the labor force, beta this is known as employment rate. Employment rate. And number of people unemployed by labor force, beta this is called as unemployment rate. Unemployment rate. So what are we saying? We are saying that employment rate plus unemployment rate, that is equal to 1. Now, suppose I ask you, calculate employment rate. So beta, what will you do? Employment rate is going to be how many people are employed? 137. What is the labor force? Population se divide nahi karna hai. Many people make this mistake. How many people are unemployed? Employed? 127. What is the labor force? 134. So beta, this is going to be, employment rate will be 127 by 134. Please calculate this for me in the decimals. Okay. Similarly, if I ask you calculate unemployment rate, again beta, unemployment rate will be people unemployed by labor force. Nobody will divide it by population. No mistake should be done here. So people unemployed are 7 and total labor force is 134. So this is going to be 7 divided by 134. This will be your unemployment rate. So I hope this is clear how we can find the employment rate and how we can find the unemployment rate. Now, let us make few notes here. Important notes. First point, पहले समझो फिर लिखेंगे. देखो बेटा, जो हमारा आउट ऑफ लेबर फोर्स है, जो लोग काम नहीं कर रहे हैं, people who are not working, I have told you that because there is no other value, matlab it includes dependents also. Now imagine a person, suppose a person like you. Suppose you are currently in your 3rd year of college. Now next year you look out for a job and you get a job, or you don't get a job, but you start looking out for a job. The moment you start looking for a job, it means you have become a part of the labor force, right? So people who are out of labor force, every year from those people, few will become part of the labor force because they will start looking out for job. When will they look out for job? Who can look out for job? Number one, students who turn 18 plus, or in other words, who now become non-dependent students, right? Or graduates, once they have graduated or post-graduated, can start looking out for job. Thus becoming part of the labor force. So earlier they were out of labor force, but now they have become part of the labor force. They may or may not be employed. Ekdam se zaruri nahi hai they will get a job. So they may or may not get a job. But they're looking out for job now. So they are becoming part of the labor force. Is this clear? That's the first part. Second, suppose imagine that there was this mother who was working earlier, but she just left her job to take care of her child. Now her child is big enough. Okay. Now, because the child is big enough and the child is now capable of doing work, the mother wants to get back and start looking out for job. So she will also be part of the workforce. So in other words, any person who immediately starts looking out for job. This is other example. So housewives who now want to look out for job. Again, they may, this is V beta, they may or may not get a job, but they're looking out for job now. So therefore, they're becoming part of the labor force. So first thing that we have to understand is that from this out of labor force, अब हम आगे concept को बढ़ा रहे हैं, that some people will become part of the labor force. दोनों डायरेक्शन में आधे लोग एम्प्लॉय हो जाएंगे और आधे अनएम्प्लॉय हो जाएंगे. Some will get a job, some will not get a job, but they are becoming part of the labor force, right? Like housewives or any person. For example, any person who left a job because he thought that I want to take a break. Now he wants to again look for a job. So any person who's looking out for a job is becoming part of the labor force. He may or may not get a job. If he gets a job, he becomes employed. If he doesn't get a job, he becomes unemployed. But nevertheless, he's looking out for a job. So ऐसा हो सकता है, supposedly some numbers are given that let's say that 1.5 million people, they get a job. And let's say that 1.1 million people, they don't get a job. But they are looking out for job now. So they have become part of the labor force. ये पहली बात हो गई. Second beta. Second pointer. Note 2. Imagine that I am looking out for a job since last 4 years. I was part of the labor force. Now, all of a sudden, I think I don't want to look anymore. बहुत हो गया यार, 4 साल से ढूंढ रहे हैं, नौकरी तो मिल नहीं रही है. I get very distressed and I stop looking out for a job. So people who stop looking for job, they become out of labor force. There are people who don't have incentive to look for a job. कि यार अब नहीं हो पा रहा और नहीं ढूंढ पा रहे हैं. So there may be people who no more want to look out for a job because they no more have an incentive attached to it. So अभी तक तो मैं job ढूंढ रही थी, but now I think it's too much. I don't want to anymore look out for a job. So because I've stopped looking for a job, अब मैं job ढूंढ भी नहीं रही हूँ. I don't want to work. I will go out of labor force. अब मेरे को कोई unemployed नहीं बोलेगा. अब मेरे को labor force के ही बाहर माना जाएगा. So every year, some people become distressed. And they stop looking out for a job altogether. So they become out of labor force. Okay, beta. Now, every year, note 3. बेटा आपने बहुत देखा होगा LinkedIn पे दो चीजें हो रही होती हैं. One is called hire, and the other that many people have hashtag open to work, that I have got, they have just asked me to leave the job. There are separations from the job. Separations. So these two things happen quite often. Hire means what? Hire means that unemployed become employed. एंड दूसरा क्या हो सकता है, जो लोग एम्प्लॉयड हैं अब वो अनएम्प्लॉयड हो गए, उनको जॉब से निकाल दिया गया. सो एम्प्लॉयड become unemployed. These two things are also possible. So what will happen, beta? That means that there will be some people who were employed, but they have lost their job, and they have become unemployed. उनको फिर से ढूंढनी पड़ेगी नई नौकरी. They have to again look out for a job. And there are some people who were unemployed, but now they have been hired. And they have got a job. ठीक है जी. So this can also take place. At last, next note. Let's write that down. Note 4. Beta, imagine that you were employed. अच्छी खासी नौकरी थी. But now, all of a sudden, you think, I don't want to work anymore. Let me just retire. Or you may think that I want to dedicate some time to my house. I want to take care of my family, and I will rejoin sometime later. So there may be people who retire, who were working, but now they have retired. Or people who willingly quit job to rest for a while. Or maybe again, I gave you an example. Maybe, I am a new mother. I want to leave for some time and I want to take care of my family. So other reasons, like taking care of family. Due to these are those people who were better employed, but now they are not even looking for a job. Unemployed nahi ho rahe hain. They're going out of labor force. So this direction is also possible, that from employed, you will simply go out of labor force. That is also possible. Now, one last thing here. So write down the last note, note 5. Now, but suppose I'm employed in XYZ company. It might be possible that now I switch my job, right? Or I am employed as, let's say, a professor. It might be possible that now again I switch my job and I go into some other kind of job. So it is possible that people who are employed switch job. But remain employed. So this is shown by something like this. They were employed, they remain employed, but they keep switching their jobs. So you have to consider all of this. This is now the complete relationship that we have drawn. This relationship takes into consideration all these things that I have written. There can be separations, there can be hires, there can be quits, there can be layoffs. Layoff matlab ki people who were employed, but now they have become unemployed. This is a layoff. Right? So considering all of these things, this is the entire diagram that you can draw as a relationship between these things. And these relationships are very, very important, even from exam point of view. Now, I want to define something which is known as average duration of unemployment. वैसे तो ये वर्ड ही अपने आप में समझा देता है कि इसका क्या मतलब है, but let's understand. The average time that you spend being unemployed, that is known as average duration of unemployment. So we can simply say, in very simple terms, we can say that the average length of time people spend unemployed is called average duration of unemployment. Okay, beta. Now, different countries will have different this thing. ठीक है, तो मैं अपनी इंडिया के डेटा को एनालाइज करके I can look into the data and I can tell अच्छा कितने टाइम के लिए on an average it takes a person to get a new job. Suppose today I become unemployed, how much time will it take for me to get into a new job? So different countries have different data set, and your book suggests that I think so for US it is 2 to 3 months. Okay, so again this differs from country to country. Okay, it can be different for each country. Okay, now we want to go ahead and we want to talk about something which is very, very important in this chapter, and that is the peaks and lows. But usually empirical result or empirical data does not come in exam. मतलब ऐसा कोई नहीं पूछेगा कि 1990 में यूएस में कितना अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट था या 1994 में यूएस में कितना अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट था. People will not ask that. But still, because you are an economics student, you should be aware about some of the graphs and how to interpret those graphs. Okay, so I am just going to go ahead and I'm going to take you through one of that graph, and I'm going to go ahead and explain to you what it means. So let's say I take year here, and let's say I take unemployment rate here. Right? This is again a US data that I'm teaching you. Let's say that beta, the data set looks something like this. ये important नहीं है, समझो कि क्या हो रहा है और कैसे हो रहा है. Beta, note that this is going high to high to high to high. Lows भी आ रहे हैं, but it's going from high to high to high to high. Whenever you see such graphs, from those graphs, you can find what is called as a trend. What is a trend? A trend is a line that you draw through the graph. So if I were to draw a line through this much part of the graph, I will understand that it must be an upward line. I cannot draw a downward sloping line. No, वो तो नहीं बन रही है. So if I draw a line through these points, I clearly see it should be an upward sloping line. And if I see a line through these points, I see that this should be a downward sloping line. Because this line that you draw, that is called as trend. And what does a trend tells me? A trend tells me a long run movement. So a trend is telling me, if I draw an upward slope line, it means that over time, unemployment rate is increasing. More people are becoming unemployed. And if I draw a downward sloping line, it means that over time, people are getting jobs and unemployment rate is decreasing. Okay? So you can just make a note of this point. ये किसी भी ग्राफ के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है. मतलब आपको, as I told you, कोई एक ग्राफ इसमें हमें याद करने की जरूरत नहीं है. We don't have to remember one particular graph because these are just empirical data. But you should understand how to read a graph in general. So we can say that there is a trend, and a trend represents long run situation. In this case, so if you go to the data point, बस एक यहाँ का मैं बता रही हूँ, this data point, it is 1980. So in this case, it is showing that till 1980, unemployment rate was increasing. Post which it started to decrease. Okay, beta. Post which it started to decrease. Now, why does unemployment rate increase and why does unemployment rate decrease? There are multiple reasons behind it. Like one of the major thing that is there, that is known as your the cyclical movements, whether your country is during a period of recession or boom. And then the second thing is, what are your economy's policies? So how unemployment rate changes and what are the factors behind these unemployment rates? We want to get a detail of those, but we will get a detail through time. मतलब एकदम से अभी हम नहीं बता रहे कि unemployment क्यों बढ़ता है, क्यों घटता है. जब हम Phillips curve पढ़ लेंगे, जब हम inflation समझ लेंगे, then we will go ahead and understand what are the reasons and what is the trade-off between unemployment rate and other policies. For now, we will stop here for the moment.